Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing part 1 of my now yearly Q&A video. I asked for your questions, you provided them, and here are my answers. This first part is going to be focused on the more personal questions that I got, as well as near the end of it, some more Sharks-related prospect type of questions as well. I should note that there were some people who asked some pretty similar questions, a lot of overlapping details to them, so I might not mention every single person by name, but hopefully I will be able to answer all of your questions all the same. And let us start off at the top of my list with a set of questions from Irene. The first of which is, how did I get to know so much about hockey? Well, this is a very flattering question for sure, though I wouldn't say I'm the most knowledgeable person out there. However, it's just something that has kind of come with time. I've seen every single San Jose Sharks game for many years. Even when they're not playing, I'm watching hockey pretty much every single day, including the playoffs, even if the Sharks don't qualify. And so just over the years, I've absorbed the information, some of the ins and outs of hockey, and have gotten to a decent level. So there's no special trick or method that I have done. It's just something that has come with time. Next question is, do I take notes during games for my game reviews? And I actually do not. I did back when I originally started this channel, but I kind of quickly moved away from that. Perhaps it would provide a little bit more organization to those videos, but at the moment it's not something that I am doing. Next question is, how much prep time goes into my non-game review videos? And this very much varies. It's on a case-by-case video basis. Sometimes it might only take a couple of hours, other times it'll take a few more hours than that, and so it's hard to really give an actual answer there. And then also the final question, how did I get so good at public speaking? This is a little bit of a strange one because I actually wouldn't consider what I am doing to be public speaking. Sure, I'm able to vocalize my ideas decently well, but to me, a public speaker is someone who speaks in front of a large crowd, and while this video might be watched by hundreds of people, it is me just directly speaking to a camera, very detached, I would say, and so it's kind of still up in the air just how good my public speaking skills actually are. Next question comes from Jacked Up Productions, who asks, am I planning any special format videos for my channel? Am I looking to include like some special guests, for instance? I would be open to the opportunity, but at the moment there's nothing planned, there's nothing imminent or in the pipeline. Right now it is just me flying solo, continuing to make these videos, and I'm perfectly fine with that, but if the opportunity were to come up, I would be open to going for it. And then the next question from them as well is, have I ever been to San Jose for a Sharks game? I actually have not. In fact, I've never even been to the state of California, which is kind of funny considering the San Jose Sharks are my favorite team, but that's the reality of the situation. And then kind of on a follow-up on that question, Alex Green asks, am I planning to go to San Jose at some point? It certainly would be nice. I don't have any necessarily plans for this particular season, so I probably won't get out there this year, but perhaps in a couple of years when the Sharks are a better team, they're winning some games, I'll be able to get out there for an extended period of time, couple games here or there, and I'll certainly let you guys know if that does actually end up happening. Next question comes from Kelly, which is also a pretty similar one, which is, am I looking to collab with any other hockey or San Jose Sharks content creators? Once more, very similar answer here, which is basically that there's nothing immediately planned happening at the moment, but if there were a chance to do something, it would certainly be pretty cool. The couple of interviews that I did with Brody Brazil this past season was a very fun experience, and I would say that the ultimate goal would be to try and get onto like the San Jose Sharks broadcast. I think that would be incredibly cool if that could happen, some sort of like pre-game or intermission thing. Obviously that is very far out of reach at this point, and right now I'm perfectly fine just chugging along, continuing to make videos on this YouTube channel, but that would definitely be a really cool collab if possible. Next question comes from Kellen, who asks, if there was one game that I could go to in San Jose this season, which would it be? Well, there isn't one standout game, I would say, this season compared to last with like the Joe Thornton retirement ceremony or anything like that. But if I had to choose one, I would probably go with the Sharks home opener this season. I think that first game of the year where there's still a ton of hope within the fans and within the team would be a really interesting experience. Likely be able to see the debuts of like Sam Dickinson, perhaps even Michael Misa. So I think that would be a great game to choose for sure, compared to like a random one in March where the Sharks might be out of a playoff race by then and it would be a little bit less exciting. The next question, also follow up from this person, is, do I think the Sharks should retire Joe Pavelski's number? And I believe I was asked a pretty similar question this last year when in my previous Q&A, and my answer is actually unchanged since then, which is probably not. I feel as though the kind of retired number club should be more so exclusive. Marleau and Thornton lead the way there because of how they transformed the organization, and while Pavelski was a fantastic player, I feel as though if you allow him into that group, there are a lot of other conversations that then need to be had as well. For instance, Brent Burns, who won a James Norris Trophy as the league's best defenseman when he was with the San Jose Sharks. Marc-Edouard Vlasic, who for many years was probably the best defensive defenseman in the entire league during the early parts of the 2010s. Logan Couture, who was an incredibly clutch playoff performer for the San Jose Sharks. If you go back to 2016, he is likely the player who would have won the Conn Smythe had the San Jose Sharks actually won the Stanley Cup that year. And so if Pavelski is let in, other players do need to be talked about, and then you're kind of expanding that group to be a little bit larger than it probably should. So I think leaving it to be Thornton and Marleau for the time being is probably the smart way to go. The next question comes from Drew, who asks, are there any other favorite teams that I have in the NHL after the Sharks? And the answer to this is actually no. Past San Jose, I basically don't really care about any of the other 31 NHL teams, don't have any strong feelings about them. For instance, watching the playoffs this past season, there wasn't one team that I was actually rooting for above the rest. Having said that, there are certain teams in the league that I dislike. So for instance, a team like the Vegas Golden Knights naturally, or a team like the Edmonton Oilers, I will be willing to root against those teams, but there's nobody else besides San Jose who I actually really care all that much about. The next question, and I'll combine these two, is basically, do I have a favorite player or a favorite San Jose Shark player? And the answer to both of these is very similar, which is that I don't actually really have, or at least I wouldn't consider to be having, a favorite player. I'm a fan of the San Jose Sharks, and then of course by extension the players, or most of the players at the very least, who are on that team. But players, they kind of come and go, and while there are some that I prefer over others, I was a big fan of Pavelski or Burns or Thornton, or if we take a more current San Jose Shark player like Macklin Celebrini, I wouldn't say that they are so far above the rest that I prefer them and really have them as my favorite player. The next question is there a former San Jose Shark who was on the team and then went on to have an incredible amount of success who I would highlight? I'll take a more recent example, but there are probably a bunch that you could talk about. With Jake Middleton, he was with the San Jose Sharks for a few seasons. He was drafted by San Jose, only ever really became like a third pairing defenseman for the Sharks, and then got traded to the Minnesota Wild for Kaapo Kähkönen, and he has gone on to become actually a very effective top four defensive defenseman for Minnesota. This past season, he had about just under 22 minutes of time on ice played, which puts him quite squarely in that top four, and Minnesota, of course, was a playoff team this past season, so he's gone on to do great things, and it does kind of sting because obviously Kaapo Kähkönen never really amounted to much with the San Jose Sharks, but that is one example. But I think every single team pretty much in the NHL has a bunch of different players that they may have given up on or didn't have a lot of hope in, and then who ended up having great careers elsewhere. The final question from Drew is, do I use like a teleprompter or some sort of cliff notes when I am recording these videos? And the answer to that is usually no. For this particular video, I do actually have a paper with all of the questions and the names written down just because it would be difficult to memorize. But for the vast majority of my other videos, I'm usually kind of just going off the top of my head. Obviously, I will do kind of some like dry runs before I actually get in front of the camera to know what I'm going to say, but it still just sort of flows freely after that. The next question comes from the Yosh, who asked me, what are my aspirations in hockey? I mentioned it a bit earlier on, but I think the ultimate goal would be to try to work with the San Jose Sharks in some sort of capacity, whether or not it could be on like a pregame or something along those lines would definitely be very, very cool. But as I had mentioned, this is relatively far out of reach at this point. So right now it's just sort of plugging along on this YouTube channel and hoping that that continues to go well. Next question comes from Melt Pop, who asks, what do I think of the San Jose Sharks goal horn and uniforms? And honestly, I haven't really given much thought to the Sharks goal horn over the year. I'm not even sure if I'd really be able to pick it out of a lineup of NHL goal horns. I think you would probably be able to experience it better if you were to go to San Jose Sharks games on a consistent basis, but since I have never actually been to even one of them, I don't get that same appreciation for it, I guess, watching the game on TV, and so don't really have much thoughts there. When it comes to the uniform, I know some people really kind of care about the aesthetics of jerseys and things of that nature. I'm not necessarily one of those people. As long as it looks like pretty good, I'm perfectly fine with it. I'll say that the general direction that the Sharks uniform has moved over like the past 10, 15 years has been pretty positive. It still looks pretty good. It's nice, it's clean, it's teal. It's all very good, but I don't really have any comments on the exact sort of changes that they have made over that time period. The next question comes from Justin, who asks, do I get to go to every single Sharks game that is in Montreal, which is where I live? And I usually try to attend pretty much every single one. I've missed a couple, but at least this season I was at that game. That was the game where the Sharks actually lost to Montreal in overtime off of that Cole Caulfield goal, who deked out Macklin Celebrini. I originally didn't even see how impressive of the goal was at that time because I immediately left right after it. But obviously it was a really nice one, but that was a fun experience for sure. And then the follow-up question to this is, do I ever get any sort of comments from people for the Sharks gear that I wear to that game? Honestly, I haven't really gotten much of anything. It's basically like, as long as you don't get into somebody else's face, they won't try to get into yours. And so there really hasn't been any sort of stories to tell about these attendances at these games. The next question comes from Mario, who asks, what Sharks jersey should he get? And now I would say the easy answer to this is basically just choose whoever you like on the team and get their jersey, but I imagine he's already kind of explored this avenue at this point. And so I'll give more of like a strategic answer, which is you would probably want to try and pick up a jersey of someone who is expected to be playing with the San Jose Sharks for many years, not like a short-term type of player, which includes guys like Klingberg or Skinner, or even a guy like Tyler Toffoli who might not be with the team in 5 years' time. So this kind of leaves you a little bit limited, but with some really, really good options. Players like Celebrini or Smith. If it were up to me and I was going to get a San Jose Sharks jersey, I would personally choose Macklin Celebrini. You could obviously go in any other direction, but that would be my recommendation. And then the next question comes from Steven, who asks me, why do I wear the same shirt in every single video? And I will say that I do not do that. I know the shirts are pretty similar, but I got like a black one, I got this gray one, a different gray one. There's a little bit of variety there. I don't just own one shirt. There will be times where I might wear a shirt for a particular video, and then a few days later when I post another one, I'll happen to be wearing the same one. But I'm sure if you go back into the last few, you'll see it change at least a couple times here or there. Don't worry about me. I do own multiple shirts. The next question comes from Bay Area sports fan, who asks me, how do I manage to stay up for San Jose Sharks games? As I say, living in Montreal, while the games locally in San Jose are at least previously, they have been at 7:30. On this East Coast, they are instead at 10:30. Well, basically, I have adjusted my sleep schedule and have been on this sleep schedule for many, many years because I've been watching the Sharks games for a while. And so at this point, actually having to stay up until 1 or to film these videos, staying up until like 2 or 2:30 or whatever the case may be, I'm basically just used to it. I've adjusted the sleep schedule so that it's actually not that big of a deal for me. And so I don't really give it that much thought. The next set of questions are all actually food related, interestingly enough. I didn't think I'd get this much about my food habits, but here we are. The first question comes from Silu, who asks me, what is my go-to Taco Bell order? And I got some bad news. Taco Bell isn't really a thing in Montreal or even Quebec as a whole, so I've never actually had Taco Bell. Kind of my go-to fast food is more so like McDonald's or Subway, or at least it used to be. I don't really eat much fast food anymore, and so I don't really have much of an answer to this question. The next one comes from Metsuni, who asks me, what is the best poutine that I have had? This one is definitely more relevant because obviously Quebec is like the poutine capital of the world, and yet my answer still remains the same, which is that I've never actually had poutine. It's kind of crazy to actually say that. I might get kicked out of the city for having said that, but it is the reality. While I have like tasted poutine and obviously I know what it is, I've never actually had my own portion of it to be able to even compare it to anybody else, and so that is the reality there. The next question comes from John, who asks me a very hard-hitting one. Do I eat my mac and cheese with a fork or with a spoon? And this one kind of psyched me out a little bit at first because I kind of was overthinking it a bit, really trying to figure out whether or not I was using a fork or a spoon, because honestly, you could kind of go either way, but eventually I believe I do use a fork to eat my mac and cheese. It's just the thing that kind of makes the most sense, I would say, and is probably the popular opinion. But the macaroni noodles are small enough that you could certainly have like a spoonful of it and be perfectly fine. It's not like trying to eat soup with a fork or anything like that. So mac and cheese with a fork. And then the final food-related question comes from John King, who asks me, what breakfast cereal that I eat growing up. Kind of bounced around a few different ones, I would say, but the one that I probably enjoyed the most and had the most was Lucky Charms, which is the cereal that has the bits of cereal pieces as well as the marshmallows. That's fantastic. That's very sugary, perfect for a kid growing up at 7 in the morning right before school. It all worked out rather well. Now moving on to some more kind of Sharks related questions, we have one from Ian Hall who asks, was Evgeny Nabokov the only franchise goaltender that the Sharks have ever had? Now, he brings up Martin Jones as a possible option, but obviously he fell off a cliff in the last couple of years that he was with the San Jose Sharks. So is Nabokov the only one? And for this, I would say it kind of does depend on what your definition of a franchise goaltender actually is. If you are using longevity as a major qualifier to actually be a franchise goaltender, then you could definitely say Nabokov is the only one. He spent about a decade with the San Jose Sharks compared to someone like Niemi, who was only here for about 5 years, Martin Jones, who was only here for about 6 years. So definitely that could be one way. But if you also view it as a measure of success, well, it's hard to not include Martin Jones into that definition because he was and still remains the only Sharks goaltender to have actually gotten them to the Stanley Cup Finals. And he wasn't carried because of the team in front of him. Jones did a very good job in those playoffs. If it wasn't for the incredible offensive production of Logan Couture, who would have otherwise gotten the Conn Smythe that year with the Sharks' victory, Martin Jones would have been that second choice. And in fact, he was the Sharks' best player in that final series against the Pittsburgh Penguins. And so he definitely deserves some credit, despite the fact that his last 2 or 3 seasons with the Sharks were exceptionally bad. So it, again, depends on the definition that you are going to use. At this point, I think looking forward into the future, we're kind of hoping that a player like Yaroslav Askarov could become the next franchise goaltender from the Sharks from both a longevity perspective and a success perspective. He's certainly set up for that opportunity, which is why it was such an exciting moment when the Sharks were able to trade for him last offseason. The next question comes from Julian as well as Wes, who both asked pretty similar things, which is basically, would I rather the Sharks finish in either 32nd to 28th, that bottom 5 range of the standings, but win the first overall pick, win the draft lottery, or for them to finish close but not quite in a playoff spot and get something like a 12th or 13th overall pick. And while on the surface it might seem as though that the first overall pick is better, I have said in the past that if you are going to miss the playoffs, you might as well miss by a huge margin so that you can get the highest possible draft pick. It's actually not that easy of a question when you really think about it. And I actually view 3 different scenarios here, because the range that was given in this question was from 32nd to 28th, but that is a very significant range of placements. I would say the scenario that I would least like to have happen is the Sharks to repeat last year, which is to finish dead last yet again. If they're putting up another just 50 points on the season and they're right at the bottom of the standings, even if they get that first overall pick, I don't think that would be a successful season. I think that would be a very real problem for San Jose. That, to me, is the scenario that I would least like to have happen. The other 2 are a bit more difficult and a bit closer together, because if the Sharks are on the higher end of this range, let's say 28th place, that is 5th last in the league, if you look at this past season, the team that was 5th last was actually the Boston Bruins at 76 points. That would be a 24-point improvement in the standings for the Sharks this season if they were actually able to do that. That is about a dozen more wins. That would be a significant step forward and what I would view as a good year for the Sharks. And if that also came attached with a first overall pick, that would be a massive, massive success. You almost couldn't hope for better than that. And so that would be a great result, probably the one that does end up winning out. But let us not underestimate what could be valuable about finishing, let's say, 13th last in the NHL, getting about 90 points, being close in that playoff race, but maybe falling out in early April. That would be really good, not necessarily because the draft pick is valuable. Obviously, you'd rather have first pick, but it is the implication of what a 13th last place finish actually means. Because if the Sharks were truly going to end up with 90 points, This likely means that so much has actually gone well for the Sharks in the season. This means that Askarov had an incredible debut, perhaps even like a Calder finalist worthy performance, that Dickinson and Michael Misa found their footing pretty well, that Celebrini had a huge step forward, that Will Smith was like a 60 or 70 point guy, found success as a second line center. These are all things that would need to go well for the Sharks to actually finish in that 90 point range. And these would all be huge steps forward for the team. And so there's definitely some real value for them to be actually getting into that spot. But I do think that something like a 75 point season while still being able to claim first overall pick would be preferable. But I would take a 13th last place finish or something along those lines compared to a dead last finish for San Jose. The next question comes from Bradley, who kind of follows up on this one, which is a very simple question of, would I rather the Sharks get Gavin McKenna or Keaton Verhoeven? Or maybe the question is more so, if the Sharks have the first overall pick, which of these two players would I go for? Now, I have to be honest here, I haven't really looked into much of the 2026 draft. Obviously, I'm very aware of the players that are available, and I know McKenna is viewed as like that top pick by far. But at this point, there's still a full year to actually be played. Both of these players are heading to the NCAA and will have performances there that could change some things. But right now, it does seem as though McKenna is like that generational type of talent, kind of at the similar level of a Connor Bedard in 2023, or perhaps similar to Macklin Celebrini in 2024. And it is hard to pass on that type of player. They seem like a really, really great choice, and you don't necessarily want to be picking for need with the first overall pick when you are having that chance to get a guy who is viewed as like this transformational prospect for your franchise. Again, a lot can change, but right now it does seem as though McKenna would be that top choice. The next question is also relatively similar, coming from E-Man, who asks, would I trade up for Verhoeven at, let's say, second overall if the Sharks have like the 4th or 5th pick? Again, this does heavily depend. It is pretty early on to be asking such a question, because if Verhoeven ends up being like really, really close to McKenna's level, and this is the clear top 1 and 2 picks of the draft, and then there is a decent fall off to 3rd, 4th, and 5th, that would mean the Sharks would likely have to give up a ton of value. E-Man suggested, like the first round pick of the Edmonton Oilers with Quinton Musty, with a second rounder. I'm not even sure if that would be enough to close the gap from 5th to 2nd if there is indeed such a top brass of that particular draft. Now, if it ends up being a good bit closer and Verhoeven is considered to be the second pick, but it could be a bit of a conversation, then I think the Sharks could certainly consider making that jump, because being able to get that big, very talented right-handed defenseman would be huge for the Sharks, but it's going to depend on the price, which is going to depend on how this next season goes. Next question comes from Owen, who asks, which hyped up prospect within the San Jose Sharks system do I think might not actually pan out? Usually, I don't like to be super negative about the San Jose Sharks prospects. I try to look on the bright side in most of these cases, but outside of a few of their top guys like a Celebrini or Michael Misa, they all have some certain weaknesses that they will need to overcome to actually become good players in the NHL. Some I believe are capable of, but if I did have to pick out one who I think I'm a little bit hesitant on, I'd go with a guy like Kasper Halttunen. I feel as though his game might just be a little bit too one-dimensional to actually make it to that NHL level. He has put in the effort this past season to try and transform his game a little bit to be more capable of perhaps handling some bottom 6 minutes, where he could become like an offensive weapon on the power play while being like a third liner who is still like relatively physical thanks to his size, but I'm not quite sure if he'll actually be able to get to that point. His D+2 numbers here with the London Knights this season weren't necessarily that impressive, and I think he might be a little bit overshadowed by a lot of the other top forward prospects that the Sharks will have going into this next season with the San Jose Barracuda, so I'm not sure if he'll ever really be able to get that solid NHL starter spot with the Sharks. Next question comes from Callum, who asks, Quinton Musty or Chernyshov, who do I think is going to have the better NHL career? Now, a couple of months ago, I had my top 10 prospects for the San Jose Sharks, and I had Igor Chernyshov as that top forward prospect for San Jose. This was, of course, prior to them drafting Michael Misa. and that actually has not changed since then. I do still believe that Chernyshov is the better than Musty, I should say. Chernyshov, I think, has a higher floor. There's a much higher chance for him to actually be able to make it and have success in the NHL. And even if you want to argue that Musty has the slightly higher ceiling, though I wouldn't even necessarily go so far as to say that, I do think that the higher odds of Chernyshov being able to have that success does go a long way to making him the better prospect here. The next question comes from Chandler, who asks, what prospect would I be open to trading from the San Jose Sharks? And this is an interesting one, because I know a lot of people, when they think about trades, they want to be able to part with like the prospects who aren't all that big of a deal. You know, in the past season, people would always go, okay, well, if the Sharks just trade like Thomas Bordeleau or Danil Gushchin or these types of players. But if you actually want to get some real good kind of top 6 forward talent or top 4 defensive talent, you do have to pay a pretty hefty price. And so for me, outside of the real kind of untouchables on the Sharks roster, you know, Celebrini's not going anywhere, Smith's not going anywhere, Dickinson, Askarov, you're kind of open season on a lot of the other guys. I would say Michael Misa is probably also in that untouchable camp, but would I be willing to trade Cagnoni or Chernyshov or Musty or Wong or Ravensbergen for a true difference maker at forward or on defense? If the price was right, I certainly would be willing to part with that type of guy. You got to be willing to spend money to make money in the NHL, and if the right player were to come along, I think the Sharks should be willing to pull the trigger as long as it's not exceptionally expensive or it's not one of these kind of foundational pieces that the Sharks do have. The next question is kind of a combination of two coming from both Jesse James as well as Saunders, who basically ask, what do we need to see from the San Jose Sharks prospects for the Sharks to warrant going for more of a playoff push heading into the following season? Or basically, what is the signal for the Sharks to go all in to try and really invest to getting this team outside of the rebuild? And what I'll say here is that there isn't necessarily going to be a clear-cut moment for the San Jose Sharks that easily tells them, okay, this is the time to really spend, pay the money, sign the players, trade for the players to really be able to get back into that playoff race. There's not going to be that one moment that's going to definitively tell you that this is the time to come out of the rebuild. You just kind of have to choose what is your moment and hope that it does go well for yourselves. And I think that no matter what the results of this next season actually end up being, that moment will come next off season. If the Sharks repeat and finish dead last, 50 or so points, Mike Grier will have to make some actual big moves just to honestly kind of save his job at that point, because multiple last place seasons in a row would not be acceptable in any sort of capacity. But also if the Sharks, let's say, hit 70, 75 points this season, then I think Mike Grier will want to make some moves to actually continue the trend upwards. You don't want to be in a Buffalo Sabres type of situation where when coming out of the rebuild, there's a lot of up and down. Some years you're pretty good, some years you're not so good, and you never really get that type of stability. You want to capitalize on a team that is trending upwards. And so I would say next year is really the moment to try and go all in. But it also does kind of depend on what your definition of all in actually is. The thing is that if you're just signing free agents, for instance, well, outside of money, you're not actually spending any real assets to get these players. On the other hand, if your definition of all in is actually trading players, trading prospects and the likes, for instance, what the Montreal Canadiens did this offseason, acquiring Noah Dobson from the Islanders, giving up a couple first rounders, as well as a prospect to be able to acquire him, I'm not sure if the Sharks will go that direction immediately. You kind of have to hope for that right situation to arise, because another part of this question from Saunders was, what players should the Sharks look to be targeting? It's hard to really say from this particular outlook. You know, in 10 months or so, 2026 free agency will open up, and right now there seem to be a lot of very exciting pending UFAs. Connor McDavid, Kirill Kaprizov, Kyle Connor. These are players who would be exceptionally good signings for the San Jose Sharks if they were actually able to get them, and yet before those 10 months are up, it is very likely that most, if not all of those top name players will actually end up just re-signing with the team that they are currently on. I would be very, very surprised if McDavid didn't re-sign with the Oilers, if Kaprizov didn't re-sign with the Minnesota Wild. And so actually being able to target one of these guys is not going to be an easy thing to do, at least for another few months. And the same goes for the trade market. Noah Dobson wasn't necessarily someone that the Montreal Canadiens were looking to add, at the beginning of this past season, but the opportunity arose for them in the offseason of this year, and they were able to jump at it immediately. And so we kind of have to see what players are actually going to be available for trade as this season goes on and as we go into May and June and July of the following year to see if the Sharks should truly end up actually giving up some very real assets to get some players back. And the final question now, it is coming from Jake, who asks me, what do I think the Sharks need to do to actually market the team better to the East Coast? So as we know, a very common term that exists is East Coast bias in the NHL because many of the teams are either on the East Coast or very close to it, and there are only a few West Coast teams, and because their games, due to time zones, are later on in the night, Sharks games are usually at 10:30 Eastern time, though this next year they will be at 10 p.m., which will, I will say, help. It is not a team or a set of teams that a lot of people end up paying attention to, and so a lot of the times, these teams and their players are rather underrated. So for the Sharks, if they truly want to be able to branch out on the East Coast, I feel as though they've already been doing a pretty good job this past season. It's about trying to market these young players and their personality, and there were some really great storylines this past year, the whole sleepover situation with Smith, Celebrini, and Toffoli, the TikTok videos that the two of them post, all of the social media moves that the San Jose Sharks are doing with both of these young, talented superstars are getting people talking about the San Jose Sharks, but also, the best thing to do to really get San Jose on the map for East Coast people is simply to just become a winning team. Right now, the Sharks aren't taken too seriously because of the fact that they have been such a bad team in the standings for many years at this point. 2 years in a row of last place finishes. The year before that, they were fourth last, so they haven't been a particularly dangerous opponent to face, not one that many people have been paying attention to, but winning changes things very, very quickly. If the Sharks can get into a playoff spot within a couple of years, and actually start to really put up a fight against some of these more notable competitive teams, that will get people talking about the San Jose Sharks. That will get people starting to discuss their players in a more very real manner. And if they can get, let's say, to like a Western Conference Finals or even a Stanley Cup Finals and face off against like an Eastern Conference team, that will put those players on the main stage and really be able to bring them into the spotlight. So really, there are a lot of good moves that the Sharks organization has already been doing, but winning is definitely going to be the biggest thing. But that will do it for this part 1 of the Q&A. The next part will be answering some of the more kind of relevant questions to this upcoming San Jose Sharks season, as well as this upcoming San Jose Sharks roster. So you can look forward to that. If your questions weren't answered here in this video, they should be by the next one. Class dismissed.